What happens when Hollywood royalty sits down for what should be a friendly morning chat and everything goes spectacularly wrong? In just 34 seconds, a television host's ego would spark an exchange so explosive that it would end with one of the biggest names in film walking off set. This is the story of how Denzel Washington got kicked off Lorraine Kelly's show after a heated exchange that nobody saw coming. It started like any other interview. The cameras were rolling, the studio lights were bright, and Denzel Washington walked onto the set with his usual grace and humility. He was there to talk about his latest film, to share stories from his incredible career, and to connect with viewers who had supported him for decades. The morning had started early for him, hair and makeup at 6 in the morning, a quick run-through of talking points with his publicist, a cup of coffee in the green room while he reviewed notes about the film. Lorraine Kelly greeted him with a smile that seemed warm enough, but there was something in her eyes, something that suggested this interview might not go the way everyone expected. The makeup team had just finished with both of them minutes before. The sound technicians had clipped microphones to their lapels. The lighting crew made final adjustments. The director checked camera angles. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. Just another day in television. Just another celebrity interview to fill the morning programming block. But appearances can be deceiving. And sometimes what looks like a routine conversation can turn into something else entirely. They sat down across from each other in those familiar interview chairs, the ones with the bright cushions and the slightly uncomfortable angles that make guests lean forward. Denzel settled in, relaxed and ready. Lorraine shuffled her note cards, reviewing her questions one last time. The studio audience sat quietly, excited to be in the presence of a legend. The director counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. They were live. The red light on the camera blinked on. The interview began with the usual pleasantries. "Welcome to the show. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here." The dance that happens at the start of every interview. Lorraine started with the usual questions. How was the film? What was it like working with the director? What drew you to this particular character? How long was the shoot? Where did you film? Standard stuff. The kind of questions that get asked in hundreds of interviews every single day. The kind of questions that allow guests to ease into the conversation. Denzel answered each question with thoughtfulness and sincerity, giving the audience exactly what they came for, genuine insight from a man who had dedicated his life to his craft. He talked about the preparation he did for the role, the months of work before cameras ever started rolling. He mentioned the research, reading everything he could find about the character's world. He described the conversations with real people who had lived similar experiences, spending hours listening to their stories, understanding their perspectives. He explained the emotional work required to access the character truthfully, the vulnerability required to bring someone to life on screen. He was generous with his time, generous with his answers, generous with his stories. He gave examples. He shared anecdotes. He made the audience laugh with behind-the-scenes tales from the set. The crew watched from behind their cameras, nodding along. This was good stuff. This was the kind of interview that audiences loved. Personal, insightful, real, authentic. The kind of content that makes people lean in and pay attention. The kind of conversation that reminds viewers why they fell in love with movies in the first place. Several crew members smiled. The producers in the control room exchanged satisfied looks. This was going well. For about 10 minutes, everything was perfect. Denzel was engaging and warm. Lorraine asked follow-up questions that showed she was listening. The energy in the studio was positive and light. It felt like one of those interviews that both parties would look back on fondly, the kind of conversation that makes the work worthwhile. But then something shifted. It happened gradually at first, so subtly that you might have missed it if you weren't paying close attention. You could see it in Lorraine's body language, the way she leaned forward, not in the interested way, in the aggressive way. The way her expression changed from friendly curiosity to something else. Something sharper, something colder, something that made the crew members glance at each other nervously. One of the camera operators raised his eyebrows at his colleague. A producer in the control room sat up straighter in her chair. Lorraine's tone changed. It became sharper, more pointed, like she had been waiting for this moment, like the warm-up questions had just been a prelude to what she really wanted to say, like she had been holding back and had decided it was time to let loose. "So, Denzel," she said, and there was an edge to her voice now, an unmistakable edge that cut through the pleasant atmosphere they had built. "Some people might say you've been playing the same character for years, the strong, quiet type, The hero who saves the day? The man with all the answers. Don't you think it's all a bit, well, repetitive? Don't you ever get bored with yourself? The studio went quiet. Dead quiet. The sound of cameras whirring seemed suddenly loud in the silence. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The crew members exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern. This was not a typical question. This was not the direction anyone had expected the interview to take. This was a jab, thinly disguised as journalism. This was the kind of question designed to provoke, not to illuminate. The kind of question that says more about the person asking than the person being asked. Denzel paused. He didn't flinch. He didn't show any sign of being rattled. He didn't get defensive or hostile. He didn't even look surprised, though he must have been. Instead, he smiled. A small, patient smile that showed he had heard this kind of thing before. The smile of someone who had spent decades navigating difficult conversations with grace. The smile of someone who knew how to maintain composure under pressure. The smile of someone who wasn't going to be baited into a reaction he would regret. "Well, Lorraine?" he said calmly, his voice steady and measured, showing no sign of irritation or offense. "I think every actor brings something different to each role. I try to find the humanity in every character I play, whether that character is a hero or something else entirely. The audience connects with authenticity, not with flashiness or gimmicks. That's what I focus on. That's what I've always focused on. Finding the truth in the moment, in the scene, in the character's journey, making sure that what I'm doing rings true to the story we're trying to tell and to the people who are going to watch it." It was a perfect answer. Gracious, humble, professional, thoughtful, articulate. The kind of answer that should have moved the conversation forward into more interesting territory. The kind of answer that gave Lorraine an opportunity to dig deeper into his process, his philosophy, his approach to the work. There were so many places she could have gone from there. She could have asked about specific roles. She could have explored his method. She could have discussed the evolution of his career. She could have created something valuable. But Lorraine wasn't done. She wasn't interested in creating value. She was interested in creating conflict. She laughed, and the sound of it echoed through the now tense studio. But it wasn't a genuine laugh. It wasn't the warm, inclusive laugh of someone enjoying a conversation. It wasn't the laugh of someone who had just heard something amusing or clever. It was the kind of laugh that people use when they want to make someone feel small. The kind of laugh that says, "I don't really believe what you just said." The kind of laugh that dismisses and diminishes. The kind of laugh that makes everyone who hears it uncomfortable. Authenticity, she repeated, drawing out the word as if it were somehow ridiculous, as if the concept was beneath consideration. That's interesting. That's a very diplomatic answer. Because from where I'm sitting, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, it looks like you've been coasting on your reputation for quite some time. When was the last time you actually challenged yourself? When was the last time you took a real risk? When was the last time you did something that truly pushed you as an artist instead of just cashing another check for playing another version of the same character you've been playing for 20 years? The temperature in the room dropped. You could feel it physically. The crew felt it. The audience felt it. The producers in the control room felt it. Everyone in that building suddenly understood that something had gone very wrong. This wasn't journalism. This wasn't even a tough interview. This was disrespect, plain and simple. This was personal. This was a host using her platform to diminish a guest who had come in good faith. This was someone abusing their power because they could. Denzel's expression didn't change, but you could see something shift behind his eyes if you were paying attention. A flicker of recognition. An understanding that this was not going to be the conversation he had signed up for. A realization that something else was happening here. He was a man who had earned every ounce of respect in his industry through decades of hard work, dedication, and excellence. A man who had broken barriers. A man who had inspired generations. And here, he was being talked down to by someone who seemed more interested in creating drama than having a real conversation. Someone who seemed to think that being provocative was the same as being insightful. He took a breath. You could see him choosing his words carefully, weighing his response, choosing to continue extending grace even though it was not being extended to him, choosing to be the bigger person even though he had no obligation to do so. "I challenge myself every day," Denzel said, his voice still even, still controlled, still measured. "Every role I take is a challenge because I want to give the audience something real, something they can feel, something that resonates with their own experiences and emotions, something that means something. I don't do this for accolades or to prove anything to anyone. I do it because I love the work. I love the process. I love being able to tell stories that matter to people. Stories that might help someone going through a difficult time. Stories that might inspire someone to pursue their dreams. Stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Again, a perfect response. Dignified, honest, revealing, vulnerable even. The kind of answer that showed the depth of his commitment to his craft. The kind of answer that demonstrated genuine passion for what he does. The kind of answer that should have earned respect and opened up new avenues of discussion. The kind of answer that revealed the heart of an artist who truly cares about his work and its impact. But Lorraine pushed harder. She wasn't listening to his answers. She wasn't interested in what he was actually saying. She was just waiting for her next opportunity to attack. Like a boxer looking for an opening. Like someone who had decided before the interview even started that she was going to take him down. Like someone with something to prove. "Love the work?" she said, and now there was open mockery in her voice. She raised her eyebrows in exaggerated surprise. Or, "Love the paycheck?" Because let's be honest here. Let's be really honest. You're not exactly hurting for money, are you? You've got multiple houses. You've got cars. You've got every luxury a person could want. Some might say, and I'm just saying what people are thinking, that you're just going through the motions at this point. Picking projects based on the size of the check rather than the quality of the material. Isn't that what's really happening here? Isn't that the truth you don't want to admit? The crew was stunned. Absolutely stunned. Jaws dropped. Eyes widened. Hands froze on equipment. Producers in the control room were frantically discussing what to do, whether to cut to commercial, whether to intervene somehow, whether to end this before it got even worse. This was crossing every line. This was wildly unprofessional. This was a host using her platform to belittle a guest who had come in good faith, who had given his time freely, who had been nothing but gracious and generous from the moment he arrived at the building, who had taken photos with staff, who had signed autographs, who had treated everyone he met with kindness and respect. Denzel took a slow breath, slow and deliberate. You could see him weighing his options in real time, the calculation happening behind his eyes. He could fire back. He could defend himself with the same energy she was bringing. He could match her hostility word for word. He could list his accomplishments, his awards, his body of work that spoke for itself. He could remind her of everything he had achieved, every obstacle he had overcome, every person he had helped along the way. He could talk about the charitable work, the mentoring, the advocacy. He could get angry. He could raise his voice. He could match her hostility. He could put her in her place. Instead, he chose dignity, because that's who he was. That's who he had always been. That's who he would continue to be, regardless of how others chose to conduct themselves. "Lorraine," he said, and his voice was calm but firm. It carried a weight that made everyone in the studio pay attention, the kind of weight that comes from absolute certainty, the kind of authority that comes from knowing yourself completely. "I came here today to talk about a film that means a lot to me and to the people who worked on it, people who poured their hearts into this project. I came here to share something with your audience, something meaningful, something that might resonate with them or give them something to think about. But I don't think this is that kind of conversation anymore. I don't think you're interested in hearing what I have to say. I think you're interested in something else entirely. And I'm not interested in participating in that." Lorraine's smile faltered, just for a moment. Just a brief flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. But she quickly recovered, her defensive mechanisms kicking in hard, her armor going up. "Oh, come on," she said, waving her hand dismissively in the air. A gesture meant to minimize, to trivialize, to make his concerns seem petty. "Don't be so sensitive about it. I'm just asking the questions that everyone's thinking, but nobody else has the courage to ask. You can handle a little criticism, can't you? Or is your ego too fragile for that? Are you so used to people fawning over you and treating you like royalty that you can't handle an honest conversation? Can't handle someone treating you like a normal person instead of some untouchable celebrity?" That was it. That was the moment. That was the line that should never have been crossed. The point of no return. Denzel looked at her, really looked at her, not with anger, not with hostility, with something closer to pity, to understanding, and something in his expression changed, not to anger, not to defensiveness, to clarity, to understanding, to the recognition that this conversation was over, that there was nothing more to be gained here, that the only thing left to do was to maintain his dignity and remove himself from a situation that had become untenable. And then he did something that shocked everyone in the studio. Something that no one had anticipated in their wildest imaginations. Something that would be talked about for a long time to come. Something that would be replayed and analyzed and discussed. He smiled. Not a fake smile, not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic smile, not a forced smile, a genuine smile. The smile of someone who had just made a decision and felt completely at peace with it. The smile of someone who knew they were about to do the right thing, even if it was uncomfortable. "You know what, Lorraine?" he said, and his voice was warm despite everything that had just happened. Despite the insults, despite the mockery, despite the complete lack of professional courtesy. "You're right about one thing. I can handle criticism. I've been handling it my whole career, my whole life, really. I've had people question my choices, my abilities, my motivations since the day I decided to become an actor. I've had people doubt me and dismiss me and try to tear me down. People who didn't think I belonged, people who didn't think I would make it. But there's a difference between criticism and disrespect. There's a difference between tough questions and personal attacks. There's a difference between challenging someone and trying to humiliate them. And I don't need to sit here and accept the latter. I don't need to participate in whatever this is. I don't need to subject myself to this." He began to remove his microphone, slowly, deliberately, carefully, his hands steady, his movements calm and purposeful, unclipping it from his collar, wrapping the cord, every motion measured and controlled. Lorraine's face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks completely. Her eyes widened. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't in the plan. This wasn't how interviews were supposed to go. Guests didn't just leave. They sat there and took whatever the host dished out because that's how television worked. Because that's the unspoken rule. Because that's what guests did. They smiled and they nodded and they played the game no matter how uncomfortable it got. Except Denzel Washington wasn't just any guest. He wasn't a rising star desperate for exposure. He wasn't someone who needed this platform. He wasn't someone trying to rehabilitate an image or launch a comeback. He was a legend who had nothing left to prove. He wasn't someone who could be bullied or manipulated into staying. "Wait," Lorraine said, and her voice suddenly lost all its edge. Suddenly, it was uncertain, worried, almost panicked. "Denzel, come on, don't be like that. We're just having a conversation, a real conversation. I'm just asking questions, real questions. Don't take it so personally. This is just how I interview people. This is my style. This is what makes the show interesting. Come on." Denzel stood up slowly, taking his time, placing the microphone gently on his chair, carefully, respectfully. Even in this moment, even after everything, he maintained his composure. He maintained his class. "No," he said quietly, but with absolute certainty, with a finality that left no room for negotiation. "You were having a conversation. I was being insulted. There's a difference, a big difference. And if you can't see that difference, if you genuinely don't understand what just happened here, then I don't think there's anything else for us to discuss. I came here in good faith. I came here ready to engage. I came here wanting to have a real conversation, but I won't stay somewhere where I'm not treated with basic respect. I won't participate in my own humiliation for the sake of your ratings." Lorraine's producer rushed onto the set, breaking protocol, trying to smooth things over, trying to convince Denzel to stay, making promises about changing the direction of the conversation, offering apologies, suggesting they start over. But he had made his decision, and Denzel Washington was not a man who second-guessed himself once he had clarity, once he knew what needed to be done. "I have too much respect for myself and for the people who watch this show to continue," Denzel said, addressing not just Lorraine and the producer, but the crew, the studio audience, everyone watching at home. "I hope your audience gets the kind of content they deserve someday. Content that uplifts rather than tears down. Content that seeks to understand rather than to ridicule. Content that treats people like human beings rather than targets." And then he walked off the set, past the cameras that were still rolling, past the crew members who watched with a mixture of shock and admiration and respect, past the producers who were scrambling to figure out what to do next, out the studio door and into the hallway beyond, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The studio remained silent for what felt like an eternity, dead silent, the kind of silence that follows something significant, the kind of silence that happens when everyone present knows they have just witnessed something they will remember for the rest of their lives, something they will tell their friends about, something they will think about years from now. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Lorraine's stunned expression, capturing the empty chair where Denzel had been sitting just moments before, capturing the microphone he had left behind like a final statement. She tried to recover. She tried to laugh it off. She tried to make a joke about celebrities and their egos and their inability to handle real questions. She tried to spin the situation as if Denzel had been unreasonable, as if he had overreacted to perfectly legitimate questions, as if she had done nothing wrong, as if this was somehow his fault, as if he was the problem. But it fell completely flat. Everyone watching knew what had just happened. Everyone watching had seen the entire exchange. They had seen every comment, every insult, every attempt to provoke. Lorraine had pushed too far. She had mistaken her position as a host for a license to be cruel. For permission to say whatever she wanted, she had treated a guest with contempt, assuming he would just sit there and take it because that's what guests were supposed to do. Because that's how power worked in television. Because she controlled the microphone and the questions and the narrative, she had forgotten that respect is not something you can demand. It's something you have to give in order to receive. It's something you earn through how you treat others. But Denzel Washington had taught everyone watching a valuable lesson that day. Multiple lessons, actually. Respect is not negotiable. Dignity is not something you sacrifice for entertainment or publicity or career advancement. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is refusing to participate in your own humiliation. Sometimes knowing when to leave is the greatest display of strength. As Denzel left the building, walking through the corridors toward the exit, crew members stopped what they were doing. Some whispered words of support. Some gave him nods of respect. Some even stepped forward to apologize for what had happened, even though it wasn't their fault. Even though they had no control over how Lorraine chose to conduct her interviews. They had seen the whole thing unfold from behind their cameras and monitors. They had watched a man try his absolute best to engage respectfully and professionally. They had watched a host systematically tear down someone who had done nothing to deserve it, and they knew exactly who was in the wrong. There was no ambiguity, no gray area. Back in the studio, Lorraine tried to continue the show, tried to move on to the next segment like nothing had happened, but the energy had shifted, completely and irrevocably. What was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview had turned into a masterclass in how not to treat your guests, in what not to do. The remaining segments felt hollow and forced. The attempts at cheerfulness felt fake and desperate. Everyone could feel the tension that lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. The moment played over and over in people's minds. The way Denzel had remained calm throughout. The way he had given Lorraine chance after chance to change direction. The way he had maintained his dignity even when being provoked. The way he had known exactly when enough was enough. The way he had stood up for himself without being aggressive or cruel. The way he had turned what could have been an ugly confrontation into a lesson in grace. What Lorraine had intended as entertainment had become something else entirely. A demonstration of how quickly respect can be lost, how easily a platform can be abused, how important it is to remember that the people we interview are human beings with feelings and dignity that deserve to be honored, how the power of a microphone comes with responsibility. That 34 seconds would be remembered, not because of what Lorraine said, but because of how Denzel responded, with grace, with dignity, with the kind of quiet strength that speaks volumes. He had shown everyone watching that you don't have to accept disrespect, that walking away is sometimes the most powerful choice you can make, that maintaining your integrity matters more than any interview or publicity or moment of television. This was the story of Denzel Washington and Lorraine Kelly, a story about respect and dignity, about knowing your worth and refusing to let others diminish it, about the power of walking away with your head held high, about 34 seconds that taught the world an important lesson about treating people with the respect they deserve. In the days that would follow, people would talk about this moment. They would discuss what happened and what it meant. They would share their own experiences of being disrespected and having to decide whether to stay or walk away. They would use this as an example when teaching others about boundaries and self-respect. The moment would become more than just a failed interview. It would become a teaching moment about dignity and grace under pressure.